Tonight we're diving into something that might change how you think about thinking itself. We're exploring the secret world living inside you right now. A microscopic universe that's been quietly influencing your mood, your cravings, maybe even your personality. And you probably had no idea it was there. So before we begin this journey into the hidden depths of your own body, take a moment to like the video if you're curious about what we'll discover together. Subscribe if you want to explore more mysteries of biology and the human experience. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what drew you to this topic. Are you dealing with digestive issues, mood struggles, or are you just fascinated by the weird science happening inside all of us? Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you'd like, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the trillions of tiny organisms that call your body home. Right now, as you're settling in to listen, something extraordinary is happening inside you. In the warm, dark caverns of your intestines, an entire civilization is thriving. There are trillions of them. They don't ask permission. They don't announce themselves. They simply exist in the warm, dark spaces of your body, building cities in your intestines, colonies that stretch for miles through the winding tunnels of your gut. They eat what you eat, they grow when you sleep, they die when you're stressed. And they might be making decisions for you. You call your body yours, but the numbers tell a different story. For every cell in your body that carries your DNA, there's more than one bacterial cell along for the ride. You are outnumbered by creatures so small you've never seen them, yet so numerous they outweigh your brain. 3 pounds of living organisms that don't belong to you, yet somehow define you. Scientists call this your microbiome, but that clinical term doesn't capture what's really happening. This isn't just bacteria living in you. This is a civilization, a thriving metropolis with neighborhoods and territories, commerce and communication, war and peace, all happening in the darkness of your digestive tract. And they're talking to your brain. The gut feels distant from thought, separate, a place for processing food, nothing more. But there's a highway connecting your stomach to your skull. A nerve so large it has a name that sounds like something from ancient Rome. The vagus nerve. It carries messages both ways. Your brain talks to your gut, but your gut talks back. And sometimes it's not your brain doing the talking. 90% of your body's serotonin, that chemical they tell you makes you happy, is made in your gut. Not your brain, your intestines. With help from bacteria that never went to medical school, never studied neurochemistry, yet somehow know exactly which molecules to produce to influence how you feel. Think about the last time you felt inexplicably sad, or anxious without reason, or craved something sweet so intensely it felt like hunger. You blamed your brain, your willpower, your emotions. But what if it wasn't you at all? What if it was them? The bacteria in your gut don't just digest food, they manufacture the chemicals that determine whether you wake up optimistic or dread the day ahead. They produce compounds that can make you feel calm or restless, focused or scattered. They're not trying to help you, they're not trying to hurt you, they're just trying to survive. And their survival depends on controlling you. Some bacteria thrive on sugar. When their populations grow large, they flood your system with signals that feel like cravings. You think you're deciding to eat that donut. But the decision might be coming from microscopic organisms that need glucose to reproduce. They've found a way to make their hunger feel like yours. Other bacteria prefer fiber. They produce chemicals that make you feel satisfied after eating vegetables, content after a salad. They reward you for feeding them what they need. You think you're developing healthier habits, but you might just be following orders from a different set of bacterial overlords. The influence goes deeper than food. Researchers have taken bacteria from the guts of anxious mice and transferred them to calm mice. The calm mice became anxious. They took bacteria from depressed humans and gave them to laboratory animals. The animals became depressed, not because of trauma or circumstance, but because of the microscopic passengers now living in their intestines. Your personality, the thing you think of as most essentially you, might be partially determined by which bacterial species happen to be thriving in your gut on any given day. This isn't science fiction, this is happening right now inside you. When you're stressed, your bacterial population changes. Stress hormones kill some species and feed others. The bacteria that survive stress aren't the ones that help you feel calm. They're the ones that produce inflammatory compounds, chemicals that travel through your bloodstream and cross into your brain, potentially making you more anxious, more depressed, more stressed. It's a cycle. Stress changes your bacteria. Changed bacteria increase stress, and you're caught in the middle, thinking your anxiety is psychological when it might be microbial. Antibiotics make it worse. In a few days, they can eliminate 90% of your gut bacteria. The beneficial ones, the harmful ones, antibiotics don't discriminate. They create a wasteland in your intestines, and when bacteria start to repopulate, there's no guarantee the good ones will return first. Some people report mood changes after antibiotics, depression where there was none before, anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, brain fog that lasts for months. They blame the illness they were treating, the stress of being sick. But it might be simpler than that. It might be the silence left behind when trillions of chemical-producing organisms suddenly disappear. Your gut doesn't just influence your mood, it influences your immune system, your metabolism, how you process nutrients, how you respond to stress. These bacteria aren't just passengers, they're crew members, and they might be the ones actually steering the ship. You go through life thinking you're in control. You make choices about what to eat, how to feel, how to respond to the world around you. But every decision you make happens in a body that's home to trillions of organisms with their own agenda. They want to survive, they want to reproduce, they want to thrive, and they've learned that the best way to get what they need is to convince you that what they want is what you want. The next time you have a gut feeling about something, pay attention. It might be more literal than you think. Those bacteria in your intestines are always listening, always responding, always producing chemicals that seep into your bloodstream and eventually reach your brain. You are not just human. You are an ecosystem, a collaboration between your cells and theirs, your DNA and their genetic instructions, your conscious thoughts and their chemical communications. The question isn't whether bacteria are controlling your mind. The question is, how much control are you willing to give up for creatures you can't see, can't hear, and never invited in? They're already here. They've been here since the day you were born, and they're not going anywhere. The secret world of your gut is vast, ancient, and more influential than you ever imagined. And you're only just beginning to understand who's really in charge. Your body is a pharmacy. The ancient kind, the primordial kind that's been operating since before humans learned to speak, before we even knew we needed medicine. Deep in your intestines, bacterial chemists work around the clock. They don't wear lab coats, they don't have degrees, they don't even have names, most of them, but they're manufacturing compounds that would make a pharmaceutical company weep with envy. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine. These aren't just chemicals you've heard about in antidepressant commercials. They're the molecular language of emotion, the chemical alphabet that spells out happiness, anxiety, focus, and calm. And your bacteria are fluent in this language. Picture a bustling factory floor, conveyor belts humming, workers focused on their tasks, machines churning out product after product. But instead of steel and sparks, imagine molecules and membranes. Instead of human workers, imagine microscopic organisms no bigger than dust motes, each one a living chemical plant. And this is what's happening in your gut right now. Your bacteria don't just make these neurotransmitters as a side effect. They make them with purpose. They release them when they need something, when they're hungry, when they're threatened, when they want you to behave in a way that benefits them. Think of it as chemical lobbying. These bacteria can't vote, can't speak, can't write letters to your brain, but they can flood your system with compounds that make you feel things, want things, do things. A colony of sugar-loving bacteria runs low on glucose. Within hours, they're pumping out molecules that create what you recognize as a craving. Not hunger, that's different. Cravings are more specific, more urgent, more like chemical messages written in a language your brain can't ignore. You feel the need for something sweet. You tell yourself it's just a moment of weakness, just a small indulgence. But those bacteria have essentially hijacked your neurochemistry, turned your own reward system against you, made their survival feel like your desire. Meanwhile, fiber-loving bacteria work differently. When you feed them what they need, vegetables, whole grains, foods that make them thrive, they reward you. They produce short-chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation. They manufacture compounds that make you feel satisfied, content, like you've made a good choice. They're training you like a pet owner with treats, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad habits, except you're the pet. And you don't even know you're being trained. The scale of this operation is staggering. Scientists estimate that gut bacteria produce over 90% of your body's serotonin. Your intestines, the organ you associate with digestion, is actually your largest mood-regulating center. That gut feeling you get about people, about situations, about decisions. It might be more than intuition. It might be bacteria reading chemical signals you're not consciously aware of, processing information through pathways that evolved millions of years before human thought, then sending recommendations to your brain in the form of feelings. The communication system is elegant and ancient. The vagus nerve, your body's longest cranial nerve, carries messages between your gut and brain like a biological telephone cable. But it's not a simple two-way conversation. It's more like a complex negotiation between different factions, each with their own agenda. Your brain sends signals down, stress hormones, sleep chemicals, immune responses. Your gut bacteria intercept these messages, interpret them, and respond accordingly. Some species thrive under stress. Others wither. The balance shifts. The chemical output changes. New messages travel back up to your brain. You experience this as a change in mood, energy, or thinking, but it's actually a change in your bacterial population's chemical production. Your emotions are, in part, a reflection of which microscopic species happen to be winning the territorial battles in your intestines. Researchers can predict depression with surprising accuracy just by analyzing gut bacteria. They can identify anxiety disorders by looking at microbial patterns. They can even influence behavior by changing bacterial populations. In one study, scientists took bacteria from the guts of fearless mice and transferred them to anxious mice. The anxious mice became bold through microbial transplantation. They literally changed personality by changing bacteria. The implications are uncomfortable. If your personality can be altered by changing your gut bacteria, how much of what you think of as you is actually bacterial influence? How many of your preferences, your moods, your reactions are truly your own? Your bacteria don't just influence your mental state, they influence your physical state too. They produce vitamins your body can't make on its own. They manufacture compounds that regulate your immune system. They create chemicals that influence how you store fat, how you process nutrients, how you respond to stress. They're not just living in you, they're collaborating with you, or competing with you, or controlling you. The relationship is so intertwined that scientists are starting to question where the human ends and the microbiome begins. You are not a single organism. You are a walking ecosystem, a confederation of species working together, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes at cross purposes. Your thoughts, your feelings, your health, all of it influenced by the chemical conversations happening between your human cells and your bacterial residents. The pharmaceutical industry spends billions trying to create compounds that can influence brain chemistry. But your bacteria are already doing this naturally, continuously, in ways that are far more sophisticated than any drug ever developed. They don't need clinical trials, they don't need FDA approval, they don't need your permission, they just need to survive. And they've learned that the best way to survive is to speak your brain's language, to whisper chemical suggestions that feel like your own thoughts. Every emotion you feel, every craving you resist or surrender to, every moment of clarity or confusion, it's all happening in a body that's home to trillions of microscopic chemists, each one capable of influencing your neurochemistry in ways you're only beginning to understand. The question isn't whether your gut bacteria are affecting your mind. The question is, how much of your mind is actually theirs? There's a woman in Belgium who couldn't stop crying. For months, tears came without warning, without reason, without relief. Depression, the doctors said. They prescribed medications, therapy, lifestyle changes. Nothing worked. Her brain chemistry seemed broken in ways that defied treatment. Then they looked at her gut. Her bacterial population was devastated. Years of antibiotics for recurring infections had turned her intestinal ecosystem into a wasteland. The species that normally produced mood-stabilizing compounds were nearly extinct. The ones that remained were inflammatory troublemakers, pumping out chemicals that crossed into her brain and triggered endless sadness. When they restored her gut bacteria through careful dietary changes and targeted probiotics, her depression lifted. Within weeks, the crying stopped. The fog cleared. She felt like herself again. This is the uncomfortable reality scientists are discovering about mental health. Your mood isn't just determined by your thoughts, your circumstances, or even your genes. It's influenced by which microscopic organisms happen to be thriving in your gut on any given day. Your bacteria are mood architects. They don't just live in your intestines, they design the emotional landscape of your daily experience. Imagine your gut as a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves are lined with different bacterial species. Each species produces its own chemical signature, its own molecular story. Some write comedies, producing compounds that make you feel light, optimistic, ready to laugh. Others prefer tragedies, manufacturing molecules that pull you toward melancholy, anxiety, despair. The collection changes constantly. Stress can burn down entire sections, destroying beneficial species and leaving empty spaces for opportunistic bacteria to colonize. A course of antibiotics can clear whole floors, creating silence where there used to be chemical conversations. What you eat determines which stories get told most loudly, and you experience this shifting library as your emotional state. Scientists have identified specific bacterial strains that correlate with specific mental health conditions. People with major depression often have reduced populations of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, species that produce GABA, the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. Their guts are instead dominated by inflammatory bacteria that trigger stress responses in the brain. Those with anxiety disorders frequently show overgrowth of bacteria that produce stress hormones and inflammatory compounds. Their intestinal ecosystem has become unbalanced, skewed toward species that keep the body in a constant state of alertness, like a smoke alarm that won't stop beeping. Even more striking are the behavioral changes researchers observe when they alter bacterial populations. Mice given bacteria from depressed humans become withdrawn, stop exploring, lose interest in activities they once enjoyed. The bacteria aren't trying to make these mice depressed. They're just doing what bacteria do, surviving, reproducing, producing chemicals as byproducts of their metabolism. But those chemical byproducts happen to be the same molecules that regulate mood in mammalian brains. It's an accident of evolution that bacterial waste products can function as human neurotransmitters, but it's an accident that shaped the development of our nervous systems for millions of years. Your ancestors who survived famines, predators, and diseases were the ones whose gut bacteria produced the right chemical signals at the right times. Bacteria that encouraged risk-taking when food was scarce, bacteria that promoted caution when danger was near, bacteria that fostered social bonding when cooperation meant survival. Over millennia, human psychology and bacterial chemistry co-evolved. Your capacity for joy, fear, love, and sorrow isn't just a product of your brain. It's the result of an ancient partnership between your neurons and your microbes. This partnership can be fragile. Modern life disrupts it in ways our ancestors never experienced. Processed foods feed harmful bacteria while starving beneficial ones. Chronic stress creates chemical environments that favor inflammatory species. Antibiotics, miracle drugs that save lives, also accidentally destroy bacterial communities that took years to establish. Each disruption changes the chemical messages flowing between your gut and brain. A course of antibiotics for a sinus infection might leave you feeling anxious for months. A period of high stress might shift your bacterial population in ways that make depression more likely. A diet of processed foods might gradually alter your microbial ecosystem until you find yourself craving junk food and struggling with mood swings. You blame yourself for these changes. You think you should have more willpower, better coping skills, stronger mental health, but you might actually be dealing with a bacterial ecosystem that's been thrown out of balance by forces beyond your conscious control. The most unsettling part is how specific these bacterial influences can be. Some species produce compounds that make you seek out social interaction. Others manufacture molecules that make you want to isolate. Some bacterial strains are associated with increased empathy and emotional sensitivity. Others correlate with reduced emotional responsiveness. Your personality, the constellation of traits that makes you uniquely you, might be partially determined by which bacterial species happen to be most abundant in your gut. Change the bacteria, and you might change fundamental aspects of who you are. Researchers are already using targeted bacterial interventions to treat mental health conditions. Specific probiotic strains, dubbed psychobiotics, are showing promise in clinical trials for depression, anxiety, and even autism spectrum disorders. But the implications go far beyond treatment. If bacteria can influence personality, what does that mean for free will, for personal responsibility, for the entire framework we use to understand human behavior? You make decisions every day that feel completely voluntary, but those decisions happen in a brain that's constantly receiving chemical signals from trillions of bacterial organisms. Signals that can make you feel optimistic or pessimistic, social or withdrawn, impulsive or careful. How many of your choices are truly your own? How many are collaborative decisions made by the ecosystem of organisms that call your body home? The bacteria in your gut don't care about your happiness. They don't care about your mental health. They care about survival, their own survival. But in the process of staying alive, they become involuntary architects of your emotional experience. They build the chemical foundation upon which your thoughts and feelings rest, and that foundation is more fragile, more variable, and more influential than most people realize. You are not just thinking with your brain, you are thinking with your entire ecosystem. Every emotion, every mood, every moment of clarity or confusion, it's all emerging from a complex negotiation between your human consciousness and the microscopic community that shares your body. The question that haunts this research is simple. If your bacteria can shape your thoughts, and your thoughts shape your actions, and your actions shape your life, then who is really living your life? Now, I'm sure you've experienced something like this. You suddenly get this craving for something sweet, perhaps donuts. The craving arrives like weather, sudden, insistent, seemingly from nowhere. Your rational mind knows you had a healthy breakfast an hour ago, but your body is sending different signals, urgent ones. You tell yourself it's a lack of willpower, a moment of weakness, but what if it's not your weakness at all? What if it's their strength? Deep in your intestines, colonies of bacteria are staging a biochemical coup. They've been multiplying for days, feeding on the sugar from your weekend indulgences. Now they've reached critical mass, they need more fuel to survive, to reproduce, to expand their territory, and they've learned exactly how to get it from you. They don't speak your language, but they're fluent in your body's chemical vocabulary. They produce compounds that mimic hunger hormones, molecules that create what feels like an emergency. Your brain receives these signals and translates them into thoughts. I need something sweet, right now. You think you're making a choice, but you're actually responding to a hijacked biochemical system, a communication network that's been compromised by microscopic organisms with their own agenda. This is the hidden war happening inside you every day, a battle for control over your appetites, fought with chemical weapons you can't see, by enemies you didn't know you had. Your gut is not neutral territory. It's a contested landscape where different bacterial species compete for resources, territory, and influence over your behavior. Each faction has evolved strategies to ensure you feed them what they need. The sugar lovers are particularly sophisticated. When their populations grow large, they don't just create cravings, they create specific cravings. Hunger for exactly the foods they need to survive. They can make you crave chocolate when they need cocoa compounds, pizza when they need processed carbohydrates, ice cream when they require both sugar and fat. They've essentially learned to program your reward system. When you eat what they want, they produce compounds that trigger the release of dopamine in your brain. You feel satisfied, pleased with your choice, more likely to make the same decision again. They're training you like a lab rat, rewarding behaviors that benefit them. Meanwhile, the fiber-loving bacteria work differently. They're the quiet diplomats of your gut ecosystem. When you eat vegetables, whole grains, foods rich in complex carbohydrates, they produce short-chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation, improve your mood, and make you feel genuinely satisfied. But they're often outnumbered. Modern diets favor the fast-reproducing, sugar-loving species. These bacteria multiply quickly, overwhelm the beneficial ones, and shift the entire ecosystem toward craving more processed foods. It's a positive feedback loop that spirals away from health. You've probably experienced this cycle without realizing it. A few days of eating poorly and suddenly healthy foods taste bland, unsatisfying. Your cravings intensify, vegetables seem pointless, your body seems to actively resist nutritious choices. Your gut microbiome has shifted toward species that produce different chemical signals, that reward different behaviors, that literally change what your body perceives as satisfying food. The most insidious part is how these bacteria exploit your body's natural survival mechanisms. When beneficial bacterial populations crash from antibiotics, stress, or poor diet, your gut sends distress signals to your brain. These feel like hunger, but they're actually calls for help, from a disrupted ecosystem. You interpret these signals as a need for food, any food, but what your gut actually needs is the specific nutrients required to restore bacterial balance. The problem is, the loudest voices in this chemical conversation often come from the least helpful bacteria. Imagine your gut as a democracy where the most selfish citizens have learned to shout the loudest. They don't want what's best for the community, they want what's best for themselves, and they've figured out how to make their personal needs feel like national emergencies. The sugar-craving bacteria produce compounds that create anxiety when they're not fed. The processed food lovers manufacture molecules that make you feel sluggish and dissatisfied when you eat whole foods. They're quite literally sabotaging your satisfaction with healthy choices. This bacterial manipulation of appetite goes beyond individual meals. It shapes your long-term relationship with food, your weight, your metabolism, even your risk of developing diabetes and heart disease. The bacteria that dominate your gut ecosystem don't just influence what you want to eat, they influence how your body processes what you do eat. Some bacterial species make you more efficient at extracting calories from food, storing more energy as fat. Others improve your metabolic flexibility, helping you burn both carbohydrates and fats effectively. The difference between these populations can mean the difference between maintaining a healthy weight and struggling with obesity, regardless of willpower or conscious effort. You've been told that weight management is about calories in versus calories out, about discipline and self-control, but you're fighting a battle on a battlefield you can't see, against opponents you didn't know existed, with weapons, your own appetite and metabolism, that may have been compromised by the enemy. The food industry has inadvertently weaponized this bacterial influence. Processed foods are designed to be irresistible, but they also happen to perfectly feed the bacterial species that create the strongest cravings. Every processed meal shifts your gut ecosystem slightly toward bacteria that will make you crave more processed meals. It wasn't meant as a conspiracy, but merely an accident of capitalism meeting bacterial evolution. However, the result is the same: foods that create their own demand by changing the bacterial populations that influence your appetite. Breaking free from this cycle isn't just about willpower. It's about understanding that you're not just changing your diet, you're changing your gut ecosystem. And ecosystems don't change overnight. When you start eating healthier foods, you're not just nourishing your body, you're conducting biological warfare against the bacteria that have been controlling your cravings. They don't surrender quietly, they produce compounds that make healthy foods taste worse, that intensify cravings for their preferred fuel, that make you feel deprived and dissatisfied. This is why changing your diet feels so difficult initially. You're not just fighting your own habits, you're fighting the chemical resistance of trillions of microorganisms that profit from your poor choices. But ecosystems can be changed. Beneficial bacteria can be cultivated. The chemical voices calling for sugar and processed foods can be quieted, replaced by whispers encouraging vegetables and whole grains. The question is, are you ready to take back control of your own appetite? Or will you continue to mistake bacterial manipulation for personal choice? There's a moment when you realize the house you've been living in isn't actually yours. You've been making the mortgage payments, mowing the lawn, choosing the paint colors, but the real owners have been living in the basement, quietly controlling the thermostat, deciding what groceries get delivered, influencing which rooms feel comfortable and which feel somehow wrong. This is what it's like to discover that your gut bacteria have been shaping your thoughts, your moods, your cravings. The revelation that your own body has been occupied territory, ruled by microscopic organisms with their own agenda. But here's what the research also shows: you can reclaim control. Not completely, you'll always be an ecosystem, always be in partnership with trillions of bacterial residents. But you can choose which partners to cultivate, which voices to amplify, which chemical conversations to encourage. The path back to bacterial balance isn't simple. It's not a matter of taking a probiotic supplement and hoping for the best. Your gut ecosystem is as complex as a rainforest, as unique as a fingerprint. What works for one person's microbiome might fail completely for another's, but there are principles, universal truths about how to nurture beneficial bacteria and starve out the troublemakers. Start with diversity. A healthy gut ecosystem isn't dominated by any single bacterial species. It's a thriving metropolis with many different neighborhoods, each contributing different functions. Modern life tends to simplify this ecosystem, reducing it to a few dominant species that thrive on processed foods and sugar. The solution is to eat like your bacterial diversity depends on it. Every different plant food you consume feeds different bacterial species. An apple feeds different bacteria than broccoli, which feeds different bacteria than quinoa, which feeds different bacteria than fermented vegetables. Each meal is an opportunity to vote for the kind of bacterial democracy you want living in your gut. Aim for 30 different plant foods per week, not 30 servings, 30 different types. Herbs count, spices count. The goal is to feed as many different beneficial bacterial species as possible, creating a diverse ecosystem that's resilient to disruption. Fermented foods are particularly powerful. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, yogurt with live cultures. These aren't just foods, they're bacterial reinforcements. Each serving introduces new species to your gut ecosystem and provides food for beneficial bacteria already living there. But diet alone isn't enough. Your bacterial ecosystem responds to more than just what you eat. It responds to how you live. Chronic stress is bacterial poison. It floods your gut with hormones that kill beneficial species while allowing inflammatory ones to flourish. The bacteria that thrive under stress aren't the ones that produce calming compounds. They're the ones that keep your body in a state of alert, creating more stress. Breaking this cycle requires more than stress management. It requires stress ecology. Understanding that your mental state directly influences which bacterial species dominate your gut, which in turn influences your mental state. Sleep affects your bacterial rhythms. Your gut bacteria have their own circadian clocks, populations that rise and fall with natural light cycles. Disrupted sleep disrupts these bacterial rhythms, shifting your ecosystem towards species that interfere with both sleep and mood. Exercise doesn't just strengthen your muscles, it strengthens your beneficial bacteria. Physical activity increases the diversity of your gut microbiome and promotes the growth of bacteria that produce anti-inflammatory compounds. A sedentary lifestyle, on the other hand, creates bacterial stagnation. Even your social connections influence your gut bacteria. People who live together develop similar bacterial populations. Isolated individuals often have less diverse microbiomes. Your bacterial ecosystem is partially shaped by the human ecosystem you inhabit. The most challenging part of restoring bacterial balance is patience. Your gut ecosystem didn't become unbalanced overnight, and it won't rebalance overnight either. Beneficial bacteria are often slower to reproduce than harmful ones. They're the tortoises in a world of bacterial hares. When you start feeding beneficial bacteria, you might initially feel worse, not better. As harmful bacterial populations die off, they release toxins. As beneficial populations slowly grow, they compete with established troublemakers for territory. Your gut becomes a battlefield, and you experience this as digestive upset, mood swings, and intensified cravings for the foods that fed your old bacterial regime. This is called the die-off effect, and it's temporary. But it's also why many people abandon healthy eating after a few days or weeks. They mistake bacterial resistance for personal failure. Understanding this process changes everything. Those sugar cravings are evidence that you're successfully starving bacteria that have been manipulating your appetite. That digestive discomfort is a sign that your bacterial ecosystem is in the process of restructuring itself. The timeline varies, but most people notice changes within 2 to 4 weeks of consistently feeding beneficial bacteria. Not just digestive changes, mood changes, energy changes, sleep changes. The improvements often surprise people because they expected to feel physically better, not mentally clearer. This is the moment when you realize how much your bacterial passengers have been influencing your daily experience, when the fog lifts, when cravings quiet, when your mood stabilizes in ways that have nothing to do with external circumstances. You begin to understand that you're not just improving your health, you're changing the fundamental partnership that defines your existence. You're choosing which microscopic organisms to invite into collaboration, which chemical conversations to encourage, which biological democracy to cultivate in your own body. The goal isn't to eliminate all bacteria, that's impossible and undesirable. The goal is to create a bacterial ecosystem that serves your well-being rather than undermining it, to shift from being controlled by your microbiome to being in conscious partnership with it. You will always be more bacteria than human, but you can choose which bacteria to be more of. The bacteria are listening, they're always listening, and they're ready to respond to the choices you make, starting with your very next meal.